But in a situation where you find that they look at the
not necessarily tribal or regional.
but I have said that. But in a situation where you find that they look at the
not necessarily tribal or regional.
but I have said that.
All right, thank you for staying with us. It's Daybreak reaching you from Trust Television. Now we look at the dailies on Daybreak, and we are in the studio with Suleiman Suleiman, Deputy Editor-in-Chief, Daily Trust newspaper. Before we begin a look at the papers, good morning. And well, you were whispering to my ears. You were in Maiduguri on the day that incident happened. What was it like? What was the experience?
First of all, it was the first time that I had the sound of gunshots outside of film, as in real life, for me personally. I had gone to visit a friend of mine and also to see a mentor of mine, Professor Pate, and my friend Abdul Muttalib, both of whom were teaching at the University of Maiduguri at the time. I had just enrolled for my PhD from the UK, and then I went there straight. But I was also interested in seeing what was really going on in the Northeast, So I had that opportunity to see what was going on. And it was easy to see that the soldiers were fighting an unequal battle, like you put it, asymmetric, you understand? Because the insurgents were mixed with the populace. At that time, the civilian JTF had not come, so they had not then pushed Boko Haram into the forests, Sambisa and all that. They were still living within communities, you understand? And it was difficult for soldiers to identify who was Boko Haram and who was not. So that created a siege mentality, on the part of the military, in such a way that the slightest spark will just lead to the kind of things that happened that day. In fact, I remember that we had to take a canoe to cross a river before we get onto the University of Maiduguri campus,
Terrible. As a result of that.
So so it was, it gave me my first and last, experience of first-hand experience of insurgency in Nigeria. But happily, I think we're more or less over that chapter now. It's not that the issue is over, but at least we've gone much beyond that kind of situation.
Right.
So we should be happy for that.
All right then. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the stories that made headlines today on our papers. And below the nameplate, you'd see UK to... By the way, we are starting with Daily Trust, as always. UK to recognize Nigeria's COVID-19 vaccine certificate from October 11th. You'd also see Anambra FG backs Malami on possible state of emergency. Buhari opposed to it. That's according to Obiano, the governor of Anambra State. UK, the lead story says UK medication. Bajabiamila governors, others spent millions to visit Tinubu. The riders, they are saying 265 million expended on trips. No, we funded it ourselves. The governors and lawmakers are responding. You'd see politicians wasted public funds on journeys, civil society organizations. Lagos governor unveils pro-Tinubu group. And there on the front page of the Daily Trust newspaper, you would see an infographic showing you a breakdown of all that, the implication of all the visits. You would see 58 top politicians visited Tinubu in London. The breakdown of trips to UK, and including the average hotel cost of lodging in a hotel per night. You'll see also pictures of some of those who paid those visits with the dates of those that visited. This is quite detailed, in the infographic. Credit goes to Ali Gaidam of the Daily Trust newspaper. It's quite interesting how it is graphically presented here, and I'm not sure if not many papers actually do this. from what I've been seeing, mostly. So if you want to see the details of everything, pick up a copy of the Daily Trust newspaper. You'll find also below that Nigeria's proposed 16.39 trillion budget raises more questions, less hope. You'd find that on page 23. Quite interesting stories. All right, let's take a look at the other
let's take a look at the Punch newspaper this morning. Right at the top, we have Nigeria grants 992.9 billion import waivers in 2 years. That's according to reports. We also have fully vaccinated Nigerians need to pre-departure test quarantine. That's according to the UK government. And then we have experts celebrate malaria vaccine breakthrough. Federal government plans procurement. Wow, that's quite interesting, and we need that right now. And chairmanship, PDP governors insist on North NEC adopts zoning report. And the big headline is saying 16.39 trillion naira budget funding. Sell refineries, moribund assets, reduce deficit, economists, NAS tell Buhari. And the rider is saying address insecurity. Don't impose multiple taxes on manufacturers. That's according to ex-LCCIDG. And another rider is saying block tax loopholes. Impose levies on luxury goods. Economist cancels federal government. And on page 9, we have flooding will compound cholera crisis, lead to more deaths. That's according to WaterAid. And on page 4, you find Ocean couple found dead at home buried without autopsy. House help held. And on page 8, you have Uniben suspends lecturer, orders police probe of alleged student's rape. And on page 7, you get to see abductor shoots colleague dead as Ondo Omotekun closes. And right below that, ex-SGF Lowell knew nothing about 544 million contract fraud. That's according to an EFCC witness. And on page 4 and page 6, grandma weeps as Oyo policemen extort family of 150,000 house rent. And on page 10, smuggled Tokumbo gas cylinders flooding Nigerian market. That's according to the Standard Organization of Nigeria. These are some of the stories you get to see on the Punch newspaper.
All right, let's take a look at this day newspaper, the next paper we'll be looking at. And on this day, you'd find some of the stories that goes this way. The first one at the very top. PDP's NEC backs governors, zones chairmanship to North. You'd also find below that, UK rules out quarantine for fully vaccinated travelers from Nigeria. We saw that some days ago. And then the lead story says, Buhari, petrol subsidy eroding revenues available to fund budget. Lawmakers express divergent views on 2022 expenditures. These are, I would say, basically some of the major stories that we can find on this day newspaper today.
Okay, let's move on to the Nation newspaper, where the big headline is saying, why we halted planned petrol price hike by Buhari. And the rider is saying lawmakers get 16.39 trillion appropriation bill. Explain approval for loans. And you also find notes PDP leaders to microzone party chair. NEC ratifies Ogoyi committee reports. And we get to see Atiku, why North should get presidential ticket. So basically, these are some of the stories in the Nation.
All right, on the Blueprint newspaper this morning, beside an nameplate there at the top, you'd see global food prices soaring amid energy crunch. World Bank projects Nigeria's economy to grow by 2.4% in 2021. Osibanjo off to UK for UN Climate Change Conference. FBN creating jobs, deepening financial inclusion through first money. Buhari not in support of state of emergency in Anambra. That's according to Willie Obiano, governor of Anambra State. The lead story says, Atiku on zoning. PDP has its rules. Nigerians their choice. You'd find the writers there says zoning neither the country's problem nor solution. No going back on Ugwai Committee's recommendations. That's according to the party. Throw slot open, Northern youth insist. You could find all of that on page 6 of the blueprint. And then below the pictorial there, showing you the budget presentation yesterday to the joint session of the National Assembly by President Muhammadu Buhari. Don't panic over borrowings, Buhari tells Nigerians. So that's some reassurance coming from the president. Those are the major stories on the blueprint today.
Okay, let's take a look at the last paper that we're going to be looking at today, The Guardian, which says budget of growth raises doubt amid high debts, low incomes. And you also find police kill bandits rescue 6 kidnapped victims in Kaduna. Court jails minor's son, 14 years in absentia for money laundering. And you also get to see Soludo Ozigbo. Others lock horns as INEC releases final list. And you also have Ohaneze, Pandef, Obiano, others fault federal government's emergency rule threat in Anambra. And you also get to see PDP defers decision on presidency, zones chairmanship seat to North.
All right, well, those are the stories that made the headlines this morning on the dailies. We'll begin a review of the Daily Trust newspaper that led with a story about UK medication. We are aware that the former governor of Lagos State and leader of the APC is in London on medical vacation. He has been receiving visits upon visits. And now the Daily Trust decided to lead with this story. What's the idea behind this? I mean, about 265 million naira have been spent on all the trips, and you would see, you know, a breakdown. A night there ranges from 90,000 to 120,000 naira. I mean, isn't that outrageous?
It is outrageous indeed. It is outrageous. But the most interesting thing about the story is why it had not been done before.
Right.
And why it's been done by Daily Trust. That's what gives you the wider perspective of how Nigerian media works. You know, because here you have someone who, within his party, he's second only to the president.
Right.
Because if you are not important, you will not see, you know, public officers going to visit him right there in London. And he has been there for 3 months. That means his health, it's a political issue. You understand? You know, but nobody has paid attention to that until Daily Trust is doing that story now. You understand? Just imagine, even if any other presidential candidate or potential presidential candidate, since he has not declared officially. But if you have anyone, in fact, somebody even called him Mr. President, inshallah, while in London, signifying how much they think of him as a potential president of Nigeria. That means whatever condition is holding him up there is now a public issue. It's no longer just private. You understand? You know, because you want leaders that are able to, that are physically able. And the physicality of a Nigerian president is actually an issue addressed in the Constitution. So it is, the real issue is, why are we waiting? Why now?
Okay.
He's been there 90 days or more, you know, so why did we have to wait until now that somebody is now doing a story? But thank God, at least
better late than never.
Yes.
Okay, now many will see this and say governors and these lawmakers are using Nigerian money, you know, to fund these trips. But on the other hand, they are saying we funded these trips ourselves. What do you think about this whole?
Well, they can show at least a little evidence that, you know, if you bought a ticket for yourself, you understand, at least the charges will go to your bank, isn't it? You understand? So even on your phone, you can show that, okay, look at something like that. So we can get one evidence. Beyond that is the way governance works in Nigeria. I doubt if these people paid for themselves. You know, I strongly doubt that they paid for themselves, because that's exactly when you talk about a high recurrent expenditure vis-a-vis capital expenditure in the budget. That's exactly how it comes about. You know, people spend money, public money, on frivolous issues that in other countries they would have otherwise paid for themselves. There's nothing wrong in going to visit Tinubu or any other person when they are sick, wherever they may be in the world. But it's a matter of public accountability if public money is being used. So where I would like to see this story go is for them to prove. The onus is now on them.
Right.
The job of the newspaper is to reveal that this has happened,
Right.
and this is the estimated cost to public treasury. The onus is now on them for them to show Nigerians that no, it's not what you are thinking. The truth is we paid for it ourselves. Let them show all of it, particularly the governors of the southern states. Let them show that, yes, indeed, it is their own personal money that they use.
Would you consider this maybe like some kind of opportunity for the politicians to show allegiance, to Tinubu, who is known, considered to be leader of the party and potential candidate for the 2023 election?
Again, you see, that brings us back to his potential candidacy. Yes, the reason why it matters is not just allegiance is there, but also the nature of Nigeria. That of allegiance, I think, once one or two persons go there, and you are within the system, it becomes difficult for you to refuse to go there. Because if you don't go there, in Nigerian politics, it means you are now showing disloyalty. So that one is it's a ripple effect necessarily. Once 1, 2, 3 people go, and then you haven't go. Imagine you're a governor of a southwestern state, you understand? And 2 southwestern states governors go there. Then it's going to be difficult for you to not go. That one is there. But the real issue from your question, I think, is the fact that the whole thing still boils down to the fact that this man is a potential, and still powerful politician in the country. And because the power associated with him is still relevant today, and a lot of people think that it may be relevant for tomorrow.
Right.
If you were a former governor, just former governor, in fact, I'm sure that even if it were President Jonathan, for example, as a former president, if he had been sick and been in London, I doubt if up to 53 public officers will have gone to visit him. You understand? So it is because people feel that he still has a future, and they also want to tie their future to that of his, It's about self-interest. It's not bad. It's the nature of politics. It's not bad. We cannot moralize it as being bad. But where public money is used, then that becomes a different question. But there's really nothing wrong with it.
Okay. Now let's take a look at another interesting, issue right now, which is the 2022 budget presented by President Muhammadu Buhari. Now, it's proposed 16.39 trillion, and this is raising more concerns and less hope amid the constant borrowings we are seeing right now. What is your assertion about all of this?
The budget is interesting. First of all, there are 3 things that have been significant about budgets under the President Buhari. In the first place, the budgets have been increasing and increasing significantly year after year. I think when the president came in, the highest we saw under Jonathan was around 11 or thereabouts billion, or even 9 billion. 9 trillion. Now it's gone almost twice that amount. You understand? From 11, 13, 14, 15. Now we're talking about 16 trillion naira. So you are having increasing budgets, but with less evidence that even half of the projects earmarked have been implemented, at least with less evidence on ground about what all these monies are supposed to be doing. I think Nigerians need to take that up seriously and hold the government accountable, because you cannot be borrowing on our behalf, you understand, which is the second issue, without us seeing what the borrowing is for. That's one. Secondly, the increasing tendency to fund the budget through deficits has also been quite high under Buhari, every year. In fact, they are no longer even making any punctions about it. They are saying that we will continue to borrow to fund deficits. That is, if we don't have money, we will continue to fund that. So I think we need to ask, the borrowing itself is not the issue, but what are you doing with it and where is it? The government will tell you that they are borrowing to do capital projects, but virtually all the capital projects this government has been doing, they are all ongoing and have been ongoing for 6 years. So you have forever ongoing capital projects. So if you are building a road from Kaduna to Kano, for example, or from Abuja to Kaduna, for example, or Abuja to Kano, and it takes you 6 years to complete that road, how many years will it take you to even drive on it? How many years will it
recoup and generate revenue?
The investments that you are making. So the time that it's taking the government to complete its projects is just crazy, and it's just looking like people are not really interested in completing these projects. They just want them to be reflected in budgets annually, so that all sort of things that can come from that can go their own way. That's an issue.
Okay.
And then third, the borrowings there's also a sort of interesting analysis about Buhari's budgets. We use the revenue to fund the consumption element of the budgets, and then borrow to fund capital projects. We use our revenue, which mostly comes in dollars, you understand, to fund consumption, to pay salaries, to pay, overhead costs and things like that. You understand, the recurrent part of the budget, usually we fund with the revenue that we generate from oil and from other things that, other sources the government gets, you understand. And then once we are done with that, that revenue is finished. Then we are now looking for where to fund our capital projects now, the bridges, the roads, the dams, the railways, and so on and so forth. And then government now borrows for that. Does it make sense, please, to borrow money to fund capital projects while using your own revenue to drink water, to drink minerals, to go to UK to see a potential president, to Tinubu, and things like that? You understand?
Right.
If you had things reversed in such a way that the revenue is even being used, even if it means squeezing people, even if it means borrowing locally to fund consumption, to pay salaries. Indeed, why does government have to borrow? Because government owns the naira with which is paid salary.
Right.
So what are the alternatives, to this borrowing? Some have suggested that, look, instead of just borrowing all the time, why don't we just reduce the cost of governance to see how we can,
I agree with that entirely, but I doubt if that is going to happen anytime soon, because you would need to change the constitution for that to happen. You understand? Nigeria's constitution is based on you chop, I chop. That's why it says that there must be a minister from every state in the country. So that already gives you 36 ministers. If you want to reduce the cost of governance, you can run Nigeria with maybe a dozen ministers, 12 ministers instead of 36. You understand? But you cannot do that because it's already in constitution that each state must produce a minister.
That's problematic.
So that's problematic. So even if you want to reduce the cost of governance, which is a good way to go, there is that angle. You understand?
But how do you maintain that? Yes. Because the whole idea of having each cabinet member from each of the states is to have a representation from all the various states in the government. So when you amend the constitution and say maybe you run with a dozen ministers, how do you still ensure that there is that inclusiveness in governance? The idea
that if you have a minister from my state, for example, you understand, then he represents me, is emotionally attractive. It's quite appealing emotionally. I know that there is a minister from my state. But it's part of the same, but practically, as far as governance or democratic governance is concerned, it's complete nonsense. The practice is that the minister is do ministers have constituency offices? Because constituency offices are integral to the idea of representation. They don't have constituency offices. The idea is that, okay, if you have a minister of government in government from a particular state, then those who are interested or those who know their ways from that state can, go there, get their own contracts from there and so on. It's just idea of, you chop and then I also have opportunity to chop. It is not about governance at all. And Nigerians really, really, really need to get this right.
Do you see that that's a contribution to the division and the sentiments that we always show?
Yes, it is our own sentiments that is sustaining the kind of governance that we have. You understand? Once we realize that it is if you have a minister from my state, Is not necessarily representing me. He's going to speak in the cabinet meetings, for our executive meetings always. You may even ask him, he doesn't even know the population of the people in his state. He doesn't know the number of primary schools. He doesn't know the number of hospitals in his state. He doesn't know anything about the state. It's just that he's been invited to chop. And when I say invited to chop, I'm not even the one saying it. I'm actually quoting the words of a former minister of the federal government of Nigeria.
Okay.
So this is what it's about. Yes.
Okay, a follow-up to that. Do you think selling refineries and moribund assets will be like an alternative to funding Nigeria's budget?
Absolutely, absolutely. Particularly that of the refinery. Again, where our own emotions interfere with the kind of governance we have. You understand? As Nigerians, we have this sense that we produce oil. Therefore, we should have, enjoy it, in quotes. You understand? This doesn't work in economics, because you're only a small part of a wider market. You understand? And that market influences your actions and how much room you have even to act in the first place. You understand? So when in 2019, the former Vice President Atiku Abubakar brought up the idea that we should sell the refineries, people were feeling that, well, he wanted to sell them to his own friends, which, to be fair, in the experience of privatization in Nigeria, could well have been true. You understand? But if you sell off the refineries, two things will happen, or three things. Number one, you raise, you get revenue, you understand, because people will pay money for it. Number two, you then don't have to spend money on those same refineries again. For example, only I think a few months ago, 2 or 3 months ago, the federal government had to give the NNPC another $1.5 billion for the rehabilitation of some refineries, including, I think, the Port Harcourt refineries. So, and these refineries have been moribund, or at least operating on much less than their capacity for years. So you have assets that they are not really giving you. The whole idea of assets is something that gives you value, but they are not giving you that value. You understand? And on top of that, you are spending the little money that you have on them. What sense does it make? It doesn't make any economic sense. So in my view, there's nothing wrong in selling of these assets rather than borrowing that your children and mine will come and have to pay for. You understand? The opportunities that are not available for young people today is because we are now paying for debts for the previous ones that that have been taken. And that's how things are going to be like, in 10 years, in 20 years, in 15. And Buhari is close to 80 years. He doesn't have much, well, you understand? But the future of Nigeria really counts, and we should take that into consideration when we are borrowing. That's the point I'm trying to make.
All right. Well, the thing about this budgeting and what some will say is that, well, the investments that government is making as far as capital expenditure is not yet seen, maybe because it is a long-term kind of a project. How would you respond to that?
That's the point. How do you define long-term? That's, again, it is us Nigerians and our media. We're not curious intellectually. You understand? We accept simple explanations, simple versions of events, and then when things don't work out as we thought emotionally, we now begin to complain, why are things not working? How do you define long term? Because the Constitution says a president can have only 2 terms. This the Buhari administration has taken 6 years out of their total 8 years. You understand? So in this context, how do you define long term? Is it after the 8 years that we're going to be seeing this? And then how does this work out elsewhere around the world? You understand? If you want to, I'll give you an example. If you wanted to build a refinery of about 200, that can refine 200,000 barrels of crude a day, and there's no refinery in Nigeria today that does that, it takes a year to do that. You understand? Recently in Egypt, Siemens, the energy company that is working with the Nigerian government on the Presidential Power Initiative, in Egypt, they built from the scratch a 14 megawatt electricity plant that was then connected to the existing grid. They completed it in 27 months. So tell me what you mean by long term. The issue is we're really not challenging government and governance in the ways that we should. And when I said we, I mean we Nigerians. You understand? We accept simple explanations too readily, and then when things don't change, we wonder why they don't change. Because the standards all around the world are different. You cannot tell me that if you do, what's it called, a project of that magnitude, 14, that's about the total capacity we have now, or 4 times the total capacity we are now able to distribute. You understand? You know, you completed that in 27 months. The president has been in government for 6 years. How many 27 months can you have within those 6 years? You understand? So even if you take into consideration the fact that, you know, the very change in environment will mean that it will probably take longer here in Nigeria than it would in Egypt, it still doesn't mean that it will take forever. And right now, these ones are taking
So why do you think that some of these projects take such a long time? Is it in terms of the funding? Why are we having this kind of delays? Is it bureaucratic processes that causes these delays?
I think that's an important question. And I don't see that I can answer that, you know, in one sitting. You understand? Or a few answers will do. But there are many problems. Usually people would say corruption. People will rate, but I did my PhD on corruption. So the understanding of corruption I have, I always feel that it's exaggerated in Nigeria because there are corrupt countries that are nonetheless doing well.
Right.
So maybe it is even the capacity to actually implement government project. You understand? If people actually go to work 8 a.m. when they were supposed to go to work, if people actually do their jobs when they are supposed to be doing their jobs, you understand? Even where you have corruption, you can still achieve something. You're following, you know. So I don't think that I'm a teacher, so I say you're following all the time. So, but I don't see that it is necessarily the issue of corruption. It may be capacity. It may be our own work ethics as a society. There are many societies, China for example, people take their job seriously, people go to work, people, you understand, and yet there is huge level of corruption in the country, and yet you can see that they are moving forward, you understand, you know. So people will say corruption, and I don't want to go there, because you can still achieve things without corruption. So maybe capacity, maybe we're just not as serious, or maybe we don't even have a reflection about the meaning of time. You understand? You know, because somebody has spent, just imagine, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, that date that you mentioned earlier in 2012 about the bomb blast in Maiduguri, that's about 10 years now. What has changed in Maiduguri between then and now? Other than the Boko Haram has been pushed, you know, and so on and so forth. It remains the same town. There's not been any effort to reconstruct the Maiduguri and the rest of the Northeast. Believe me, if this had happened elsewhere, you would have had a whole, they can even go as far as saying, okay, we can turn the entire Northeast or the entire Borno state into 2 or 3 mega cities. What's wrong with that? That's good ambition. So it is the sort of ideas that we have and how we understand government and governance that is part of the problem. I don't really see that it's only corruption, although of course that can be part of it.
All right. Now another story here that we are seeing on the front pages is the issue about PDP, the zoning, the whole conversation about zoning. Blueprint, for instance, puts it saying PDP has its rules, Nigerians their choice. The whole, what are your thoughts, you know, regarding the back and forth that we are seeing about?
Well, it's correct, but the truth is, the same Atiku was the one in 2011 who was insisting that we must have zoning. That the party had zoned its candidacy to the north, you know, and then Yar'Adua had taken the slot, and the understanding was it would be 8 years per zone, you know, per each, and then Yar'Adua died midway, so it still remains a northern prerogative, if you like. You understand? You know, the same Atiku at the time. You understand? You know, and indeed he emerged as a consensus candidate, although of course he did not win that primary election. So whereas he is correct that Nigerians their choice and then PDP can have its own rules, we cannot forget the fact that only yesterday he too was a champion of zoning. But the reverse is also true. Those who are now championing zoning were against it. All these so-called southern governors, where were they when people were saying that there is agreement within the PDP that, you have zoning between north and south for presidency? You understand, In 2011, all of them repudiated that agreement. They insisted the agreement did not exist because a southerner was about to become president. So the real issue is, for how long are we going to continue doing this back and forth? Where politicians who supported zoning last year, just because the tables have turned, will now come back to say they are now opposing it. Or those who oppose it now will then tomorrow come and say they are now supporting it. It is the kind of issues that make us to be dancing in circles as a society without making progress.
How important is this issue to Nigerians, really? Some will say that, what is important to ordinary Nigerian is to have good governance. So do you see this conversation about zoning and all of that as some sort of escapee kind of, or an opportunist kind of a conversation by politicians, elites?
It's more than that, actually, to be honest. You understand? Because zoning is indeed a principle that people use in some democracies to help solve problems of ethnic identity intermeshed with politics, or cultural identity intermeshed with politics, or geopolitical or regional identity intermeshed with politics. You understand? To solve these problems, to address these problems is standard. The literature is sound on this, that societies have tried where there is a lot of pluralism. They say, okay, rotation or rotational presidency can help assuage feelings, because however much you try, people see themselves as northerners more than, or southerners, you understand, or Igbo or Yoruba, than they see themselves as PDP or APC. So because the ideological inclinations of the party don't have any strong root within society, nor within the parties themselves, the zoning cannot easily be dismissed as something useless. It has its place, that's one. But my worry, and that's where I think it's even more significant now, beyond just the food and things like that, that ordinary Nigerians mean. My worry is that in the present debate about zoning, you have a situation where sitting governors who have authority to speak on behalf of their people, you understand, are taking diametrically opposed positions on zoning. First, the southern governors came out to say that the presidency must shift to the south, mind the language, because it's important. Language, choice of words in politics, very important. That power must shift to the south in 2023. And then the northern governors came out, they were a bit more diplomatic, more moderate in their language use, but they were also saying the same thing, that no, it is not constitutional. You're following? What this means is that it is priming Nigerians. The issue is being framed as one in which, not between PDP or APC, or within PDP alone or APC alone, but as a regional issue, and a regional issue in which Nigerians are on two different sides. So if northern governors say that, if southern governors are saying that power must shift to the south, and you are from Ekiti State and you don't believe in power shift, you have no representation in that kind of mindset. You understand? Right. Everybody in the south must agree that power must shift to the south. Everybody in the north must agree that power must not shift to the north, or zoning must be banned. So it pitches Nigerians against each other, and along the lines of divisions that have proved in the past, to be quite dangerous. So I would like to see that kind of direction is toned down. If you are a governor and you believe that power should shift to the south, fine, please say it. You will not be the first person, and I assure you, you won't be the last. You understand? If you are in the north, say it. If you are in the south, say it. But to group together as a forum, say Northern Governors Forum or Southern Governors Forum, and then speak with one voice, what that means is you are eliminating party competition. Both within, you are saying that even the constitutions of the respective parties don't matter at all.
And same
This is dangerous for
Atiku
us.
is saying that he doesn't think this will solve Nigeria's problem.
Who?
Atiku.
Well, again, I agree with him, but if he is saying that now, why is he knowing that now? Because we have to be fair when we make analysis of public figures and what they stand for. Certainly, I agree with him that it will not solve Nigeria's problems. It hasn't solved in the past. I doubt if it will solve now. But in 2011, he was a champion of zoning. So whereas we accept his explanation today, we also have to remind ourselves that only yesterday he was a champion of zoning. You understand?
Right.
So we can then say that maybe because it favored him then, and now it does not favor him. And if we follow politicians who change colors this way, it is again part of the crisis of governance that we have, where time is going. You know, children born 10 years ago have grown up, or 15 years ago have grown up and need jobs, and they don't have jobs. And then we keep discussing the same issues again and again and again and again.
Okay.
You know,
Now, if this conversation is that important, because we see it virtually every eve of election, maybe I would say once we're approaching the election period, we see this conversation about zoning. So
Yes.
if it is that important, why don't we just constitutionalize the matter to make it some sort of a rotational kind of a thing?
Well, again, if we can do that, and maybe that can help to solve the problem, but it has its drawbacks as well. The drawbacks are that you will end up having a president who is no more than a face. Because the key thing for democracy is that political competition, that competition between equals or between peers for any position within society. It is what brings out the best person to power. You understand? So if you say, okay, let's do it, then we know that in these 8 years, we don't have to worry. Power is coming to the south anyway. So the only competition is going to be between, what's it called? Any person in the south that can come out and win election. And in our case, it will de-incentivize any candidate from the south to even try to come to the north here to get to know us, for us to get to know him, for him to get to know our problems, for us to get to know how he can help us to solve them, because that's the point of democracy, a vehicle for solving problems.
Right.
So if you remove that element, then the whole point of campaigning, and by which I mean not giving people salt and pepper, but actually going to listen to people, speaking to them, knowing their problems and so on. So I think if we leave things as the Constitution says now, that it is open to everyone, I think this is probably better, that over time, we Nigerians, and particularly if the media makes it happen, I believe it will happen, we can grow beyond the whole idea of zoning and begin to look at candidates based on what they stand for, what their parties stand for, what their past demonstrates, you know, and so on and so forth, rather than whether they are from the south or from the north, and so on and so forth. Because once you say you agree from the south now, then you now say, okay, the south itself is not monolithic. So is it going to be southwest, or south-south, or south-east? That debate will also come. And then we end up spending the entire campaign period without actually talking about those issues that you said earlier, and rightly so, that matter to Nigerians.
All right then. Well, thank you. We'll end the review at this point. Thank you for coming on the show and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you for having me.
We had the Deputy Editor-in-Chief, Daily Trust newspaper, Suleiman Suleiman, review the stories that made the headlines this morning on Daybreak. Now, we will go on a quick break, and then when we come back, we will continue with the show, looking at our first discussion on the day. Stay with us.
But in a situation where you find that they look like the same,
Not necessarily tribal or
because I
regional.
have said that